Hello, Framelab listeners. This is Gil Duran with the Framelab Podcast. And I just wanted to let you know that we also have something called the Framelab newsletter, where we deliver our insights and thoughts directly to your inbox on a regular basis. And it's totally paywall free. You'll never have to pay to read Framelab, although you can become a paid subscriber and support our work if you wish. So if you're interested in getting on that list, the address is www.theframelab.org. That's www.theframelab.org. Thanks for listening. Hello, and welcome back to the Framelab Podcast with Gil Duran and Dr. George Lakoff. Hey, George.
Hi, Gil.
Well, the very worst thing happened that we can think of. Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris, and now a twice impeached convicted felon who's promised to act as a dictator on day one will return to the White House in 2025. And we've been talking about this. There's really no way to sugarcoat this nightmare scenario, but there are some lessons to be learned from this defeat, and we have to reckon with the consequences and what they'll be, which could unfold over the decades to come and which threaten not only American democracy, but the very survival of life on Earth itself, since all of the action on global warming will now be hampered and stymied. And I guess the first good thing to do here would be to take a check-in. How are you feeling about the election? What's been going through your mind watching, something you've sort of talked about and predicted for decades come to fruition in the re-election of Donald Trump after all he is said and done?
Well, strict father morality is real. It's out there, and it won. Yeah, there are people who think that way, and plenty of them, and they're still there. And in this election, they happen to win.
That's something we put out in a Framelab newsletter piece earlier this week. We looked at sort of 8 different lessons, I guess, of the 2024 election. And lesson number 1 was that strict father morality is growing stronger. And this will require a bit of explanation for new readers. Older readers of your, or I should say longer-term readers of your work, will be familiar with strict father morality. And that holds that all politics are moral politics, and that Trump has tapped into something deeper in the American psyche, which is strict father morality. And this is a hierarchical view of the world, rooted in the metaphor of the family, with a dictator-like patriarch whose word is law. And that your work shows that millions of American brains are wired to accept this moral system as the way things should work in the world. And we saw multiple instances over the past decade, but certainly during the 2024 campaign, where Trump is almost directly invoking this strict father morality idea. And it was clear that even as Democrats were criticizing him or saying he'd gone off the rails, he was going further and further into this strongman, strict father dictator speak. He was really framing it. That was what he was trying to tap into people, is this
Right.
willingness to accept him as the strong, sovereign, overall leader. And let's talk a bit more about strict father morality and what it means, but let's start here. One thing I hear people say a lot when we talk about the role of strict father morality is, well, it's not just strict father morality, it's also racism and misogyny and anti-gay and anti-trans stuff. But I think the thing that people don't get is that that's all included in strict father morality, right? Explain to us a little bit about what strict father morality is.
Well, it starts in the family, and the question is there are families where the father of the family is the dictator. He's the person who, runs everything, period. And there are lots of families like that around the country. And whatever he thinks is right is right. That's strict father morality. I mean, because political decisions and social decisions are often moral decisions. They're based on moral precepts, and so the question is, whose morality is there? What is the alternative to strict father morality? It's what I call nurturant parent morality, in which there are parents who mainly care about how their children are developing, how they're being nurtured, and what's good for the children, rather than what some strict father thinks is right and wrong. And that's a major difference. It's like the difference, Kamala Harris asks, what's better for people, not what's better for me, or what do I think is good? And that's the major difference right there.
But strict father morality isn't just about how a family is run, right? It also comes with an attendant social order. And I think that could explain to people what it means to say that there's a hierarchy, and that when we say strict father morality, we're also including things like misogyny and anti-LGBTQ and racism in it. Could you talk a little bit about the moral hierarchy of strict father morality?
Well, there's a metaphor of the nation as family that is unconscious, but it's there all the time. That means that if there's someone running the nation, that's the strict, working by strict father morality. So when you understand the nation as a big family, that's where this naturally occurs, and that's a natural way to understand it. We often understand the entire nation as if we're all one family, and it's an unconscious thing, but it's there. And that's why strict father morality is so powerful. It's unconscious, but it's in our brains.
So some people are just naturally primed through this family metaphor, because we're first governed in our families, to accept this hierarchical view of the world. But what I'm trying to get to is that specific hierarchy, which I think you've identified as God over man, man over nature, man over woman,
the rich over the poor. That's
whites over non-whites,
over
straights over gays, Christianity over other religions,
right?
Western nations over other nations,
right?
Adults over children,
children,
employers over employees,
correct?
And the list goes on. And some folks have added in their own version, which is the abled over the disabled, which is increasingly a tension in our society, especially in the midst of a pandemic where many people are immunocompromised.
Right.
And there's been an argument over whether we should just move on and let those people deal with it and not care as much about what happens to them. So when you look at the strict father ideology, there is a hierarchy, and that hierarchy includes all of those things. And here's another question I think that we get, and that I hear a lot of readers get very upset at when they see us refer to this belief system as a form of morality. They say that's not morality. There's nothing moral about Trump. There's nothing moral about racism. But this seems to be a profound misunderstanding of what morality is and how it works, at least according to your work. Explain why you insist on describing this as a system of morality.
Because morality is about what you consider right and wrong. And strict conservatives have different ideas about what's right and wrong. It's that simple. What do you think is right and wrong? And the alternative to strict father morality is what I call nurturant parent morality, where you care about other people. It has to do with empathy. One of the big differences between Republicans and Democrats is Republicans are strongly in favor of people acting on their self-interest. And Democrats have to do a lot with people acting on empathy, caring about people who need that care, who need to be taken, who are disadvantaged in some respect, and respecting that and giving them the care they need. So that the idea of empathy is there. I remember when Barack Obama first became president, one of his first speeches, he said, the most important thing that my mother taught me is empathy for other people, caring about what other people need. And that was profound. He says, when, the most important thing he learned. And I think that was right.
I think it's also important for people to understand this as a moral issue, for them to understand how deep-seated it is. It's not superficial. It's not just one bigotry. It's sort of a system of bigotries that are viewed as the right way to do things. And if we don't give these things the credit for being as powerful and as deep-seated as they are, we'll continue to underestimate their effect in our politics and continue to miss how they are working subtly and subconsciously in our politics. A lot of people were surprised to see, Latinos or black men voting for Donald Trump, but there's a lot of strict father authoritarians out there, and they come from all different races and ethnic backgrounds, and a lot of white women also voted for Trump, even though these people are perceived as being under threat from Trump. And in a way, that belief and that need for a dictator-like system trumps all of the other concerns we might think people have. And I think we should write a deeper piece exploring how strict father morality was present in this election and what it means going forward. And for those kind of expressing doubt or questioning it, I would say that, what brought us back together again in 2016 was that you predicted that Trump could very likely win based on strict father morality. And this was at a time when that was a crazy thing to say. Most Democratic analysts were not saying anything like that. Everyone assumed Hillary would win. And you made it clear that here's a systematic reason why Trump is appealing to a large number of people. And again, we have a lot of people who got this election wrong, rushing to now define how to do it right. And it's the same as 2016, where apparently nobody learned a lot about why that worked this way. We kind of had, a lot of this week has been, a lot of the past 2 weeks have been giving me deja vu. It feels like those days after the 2016 election when we were all sort of shell-shocked and unable to articulate clearly what the future might be, except that it would be bad. And so I think that we have to really find a way to break through with the explanation of strict father morality, because I think a lot of the explanations out there are very piecemeal. People have one part of it. Oh, it's the attacks on trans people. Oh, it's the racism against Latino immigrants. But until you see the comprehensive nature of it, you're not going to really grasp how to respond to it, I think.
That's right. These are all part of the same idea. There's one idea there with lots of parts. And it's an idea that imposes a lot of hierarchies. Whites above non-whites, straights above gays, etc. These are hierarchies that are implicit in strict father morality, and people don't understand. Basically, this is a metaphorical idea. It's based on the idea of the nation as family, which we all have, but we don't realize. There's a lot of unconscious thought that we have and unconscious metaphors. And once you understand that we have this idea of the nation as family, then other things just follow. But people don't understand in general that thought is metaphorical, that you think through certain metaphors, and these metaphors are things you learn culturally. And they're unconscious. They're just there. They're like the natural way to think.
Let's move on to point number 2, and that is that moving to the right failed again. Mm-hmm. In the 2024 election, there was a really pronounced effort by Kamala Harris to telegraph a move to the political right. This was in an effort to find the mythical center of politics. And as we know now, it didn't work. A lot of Republicans voted for Trump, and a lot of Democrats, it appears, stayed home, and a lot of swing voters chose the authoritarian over the sane and rational candidate. Moving to the right, you've written, does not get you to the center because there is no center in American politics. There's no ideology or set of ideas upon which all moderates or so-called centrists agree. And so when a Democratic politician moves to the right during an election, it erodes their authenticity, but over the long term, it also teaches Democratic voters and swing voters that Republican ideas are better because everyone's always racing to embrace right-wing ideas in order to appear as a centrist. So what do you make of this effort to move to the right?
There's a metaphor that people use that the left and the right is based on a line. You think about it, left and the right in the world. Here's my left hand, here's my right hand. There's a line between them. And, my body is in the center, right? There is, there's left and right and center. That is a metaphor that is false. It doesn't hold in the real world. There is no such thing as a center with a strict set of ideas that you say, here is a list of ideas that define the center. Not there. There is no such thing as the ideology of the center. You can't make a list of, here are the here it is. Here are the ideas. Here are the policies of the center. Not there.
So why do Democrats keep trying to find the center, and why does the press keep encouraging people to believe that there is a center and that there's a moderate position?
Because of the notion of left and right. You have a body. His left, his right, my body's in the center. There's a metaphor that we accept, that we map our bodies onto politics. And it's a metaphor that isn't true. It's not true in the world. It's a natural metaphor that we have, but people don't understand that they think metaphorically, and the metaphors are not true. They're there. Now, the metaphor, if everybody thinks in terms of the same metaphors, they become true. But in general, they don't. They're not thinking in terms of the same.
Yeah, and then what we see is that Democrats, the center becomes the right. And therefore the left center becomes the right center. And
Right.
So then no matter what happens, the Republicans win because Democrats are racing to adopt their ideas in this mythical quest for the non-existent center. And it's interesting because you have said in the past that we should stop using left and right, but it's just so ingrained, it's so framed in everyone's brains, it's hard to even talk about politics without using the left and right metaphors. And unfortunately, those feed into the metaphor of the center being there somewhere.
Right.
But, in this campaign and look, I had some doubts about it, but I also felt that the people in the Kamala Harris campaign had access to data and knowledge that maybe the rest of us didn't have. And it's easy to sit on the sidelines and second guess people, but they had her out there campaigning in multiple states with Liz Cheney. They had endorsements from Dick Cheney and a range of other Republicans, people who have long been despised by Democratic voters, especially those in the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And the idea was that this embrace by Republicans, this warm embrace of Kamala Harris, would peel off hesitant Trump voters. And this would have been considered a brilliant tactic if it had worked. But it didn't. And, was there another way to go about this? Was there another way to convince Republicans to vote for Kamala Harris without sending her out there on the campaign trail with Liz Cheney? This seemed to be, looking back now, a bit of a miscalculation.
Well, the idea of right now, Trump is seen as the identifying the Republican Party. He is their candidate. He's always going to be their candidate right now. And the assumption is because he can win, he can make he can support down ballot Republicans, he can help the whole party, etc. And that may be true. That is, when you believe these things, you can, those beliefs can create truth. When people act on them. So people act on those beliefs; they become true. And so the idea of you're acting upon metaphorical beliefs is important. And most people don't understand that they have metaphorical beliefs. They don't understand that people think metaphorically. They don't understand what metaphor means. That metaphor, is a real part of your everyday experience. There are very simple cases where you can show. For example, if you take the idea of more is up, right? So if temperature rises, it doesn't literally go up. That's a metaphor. Prices rise; they don't literally go up in the air, right? That's a metaphor. You're thinking metaphorically. But people in school are not taught that they think metaphorically. This sort of needs to be taught from the third grade up, that this is how people actually think, that it's an important thing to understand, and it's not taught. It's not part of our educational system.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kamala Harris tried to run toward the center. Trump seemed to do the opposite. He went further and further toward the extreme,
Right,
toward the dictatorial. And I
right.
think that part of what happens when a Democrat tries to change their tactics and run toward the center is that it reads as inauthentic to a lot of voters. It's
Not
like,
only
well, you
that,
used to say this, but now you say that. Now, of course, hypocrisy doesn't matter on the Republican side because it's incorporated into their one-way logic that whatever Republicans do is right. But for Democrats, they're more vulnerable to charges that they've changed their position, that they're hypocritical. And so I think that was another thing that hurt Kamala Harris was the view that she was inauthentic now as somebody who'd been sort of on the progressive wing of the Democratic California spectrum for a long time and is now, marching around with Liz Cheney supporting fracking and pulling her punches against corporate America when she had sort of been someone who had taken on major corporate interests. So what do you say about the way that trying to become a centrist, a so-called centrist in a campaign, harms one's authenticity when Trump, I guess what I'm saying is Trump was very authentically extreme and
right.
authoritarian. And Kamala Harris was in a position, I don't blame her for this, by the way, because she was thrust into this at the last moment. And it was an unprecedented campaign. She had to run it in just over 100 days. But she had to try to be all things to all people in a very poll-driven, focus grouped situation. And I think for a lot of voters, swing voters, who we don't fully understand, it read as inauthentic.
Exactly. That is the idea. When you start to move to the so-called center, you're really moving to the right and saying the right wing, those certain right wing ideas are correct. And when you do that, that raises the question for Democrats as well. What right wing ideas are correct? Or should we give up on Democratic Party? Should we give up on democratic ideas? Should we give up on the idea of democracy versus autocracy? What it does is it leads you to question the very basis of democratic thought.
And that's not to say Kamala should have run to the far extreme parts of the party. I think kind of your message has been to make progressive ideas American ideas by speaking about them in everyday language that communicates to people how those ideas are connected to freedom and to the public good, right? It's not
Exactly.
to go adopt the most radical idea or to talk about the most sort of extreme new thought coming out of the party. For instance, some people want to use the word socialist, and that's just going to turn off a wide swath of Americans. At the same time, you have these so-called democratic centrists saying, well, we have to have a message that's for the supermajority. And that means sort of throwing away in their mind, it means throwing away progressive ideas and embracing, I guess, whatever the polls say might work. But I feel like that was sort of tried in this election, and it also didn't work because there's deeper levels than just whatever the polls say the issues are. I think part of the problem in the polls is that people are asked certain questions. Polls are framed a certain way, and I think you've said this before.
Right.
And they don't get at the deeper reasoning or subconscious thinking that's going on in people's minds and hearts. And there's no way to really express that. So people say, yeah, it's because of this or that, or here's the issues that matter to me. And we assume that those issues are all important, as opposed to understanding that there's something else beneath that might shift that person's vote in a way you don't expect, because there's a moral structure under there that is going to push that person to vote a different way than you might expect.
Well, there are two major false assumptions about the nature of thought that militate against this. The one is that all thought is that you know what you're thinking, that it's conscious, which is not true. I mean, probably most thought is unconscious. My guess is something like 2% of thought is conscious. Probably 98 is unconscious. Most of the things you are thinking and believing are, there's so many of them, you couldn't be conscious of them all the time. Consciousness requires the uh, full attention of all your neural networks going, and it just that doesn't happen. You have most thoughts are unconscious, and you just automatically work on them, assume them, and that's not taught. Our educational institutions do not teach about unconscious thought. They don't teach the way people really think. They don't point out that people can think metaphorically. Metaphor is seen as bad, it's irrational, and so on. It's not irrational, it's the way people normally think about things. And once you understand that they are metaphorical, you can understand what is going on. And that sometimes the metaphors are actually more important. Sometimes the metaphors structure our behavior in a way that is a good thing. And very often, metaphorical thought is a good thing to have, and a good thing that people should have, because it can help people. It can help or it can hurt. And you have to be aware of them and then ask those questions. Does this form of metaphorical unconscious thought help or hurt? And that's something that can be studied. But because the people who study such things are rationalists, they don't see that they can or should study metaphorical thought.
Well, for those who are wondering how could anybody still vote for Trump in 2024 and who can't find a rational or clear fact-based reason, we might want to look at metaphorical thought, subconscious thought, and these other issues that are obviously playing a bigger role in our politics than many experts assume. Let's get to our next point here, another lesson of 2024, which is that boosting Trump, even by attacking him, tends to help him because it makes him the center of attention. And once again, over the past year, just as in 2015 and 2016, we saw a lot of focus from Democrats and from Trump's opponents on highlighting and amplifying every crazy thing he said under the assumption that people would automatically see these things as disqualifying, that all of this focus and amplification of Trump would hurt Trump. And we saw millions of dollars being put into efforts to broadcast Trump's every saying to millions and millions of people. But it doesn't seem that everybody was turned off by Trump's words and Trump's messages. In fact, it seems like he gained some support in swing states that had previously gone to Democrats. And so, I don't know if this is a lesson that Democrats are ever going to get, because they seem to be very committed to making it over and over again. And some people, as we wrote, are incentivized to boost Trump because it's good for their ratings, whether it's their social media engagement or their TV ratings or whatever, right. Broadcasting the craziness and the insanity because you expect people to automatically be against it seems to be something that people are addicted to. But once again, we learned that boosting Trump helps Trump. And explain to us a little from a cognitive scientist's point of view why that's the case.
Okay, if I say don't think of an elephant, what are you going to think of? Just take that one example. Don't think of an elephant. You'll think of an elephant. Say something bad about elephants, you'll think of an elephant. And when you think about it, it activates a neural system in your mind. It makes that stronger. Now, if that becomes, if Trump becomes stronger in your neural system, you'll be thinking about Trump in all kinds of ways that you may not consciously want to. This is an unconscious process. So if Trump becomes the issue, then you're going to be thinking about him and strengthening the neural system of you that you have that has Trump, that understands Trump in all of its ways. That is, Trump is going to take over your brain, good or bad. He's going to take over your brain. And that gives him power of all sorts because that's unconscious. That's not something you can control. You can't control all those details. So whether you're for or against him, you're helping him. And that's what people don't understand. You think, oh, I'm against Trump. You're helping him. If you ignore him, if you can possibly ignore him, that's the best thing you can do. Trump, who's he? Drumpf. If the name came from the German Drumpf. If his name had been Donald Drumpf, he probably would never have been elected. But the word Trump is powerful in English. It's built into the English language. In card games, one card trumps another, beats another. A trumpet is loud and forceful, right? I mean, the name itself has a meaning. Names do not necessarily have an arbitrary content. We think of proper names as being arbitrary, but many of them are not.
It's hard, I think, for people to grasp the idea of ignoring Trump, because we really can't do that, especially the way our media works, the way our politics work, right? He's going to be the president again now, so everything he says will be newsworthy. I think another way of putting it is Trump was able to really drown out Kamala Harris's message. Even Kamala Harris's campaign was boosting Trump's message because, again, they thought that, wow, if everybody hears this crazy stuff he's saying, they'll vote against him because he's obviously not qualified to be president. But that's not what happened. So, when you focus entirely on the opposition, or excessively, I should say, on the opposition, you're depriving your own side of the ability to be that center of attention. There was a period after Harris became the nominee where she really had the juice. All focus was on her for a few weeks, and she kept putting out these different ideas and making new news every day. And I was like, wow, she's actually framing. She's getting out there and saying, here's what I'll do, and making some new big announcement. But then there was this lull, and Trump retook the momentum. So we saw Trump retake the momentum and start doing his own framing. And we saw all these crazy things like the attacks on Haitian immigrants and bigger and bigger threats. And he just started every day putting out something to bait Democrats to attack, to be the center of attention. And it really never changed after that. And again, the Democrats even went along with it by boosting Trump and trying to make it seem as if Trump was making a mistake. They seem to assume that Trump actually didn't want to do all these crazy things, that he was just an old man.
The point is that they made Trump the center of attention by attacking him, not by ignoring him. The thing that Trump never wanted was to be ignored. Trump, who's he? Mm-hmm. Here's our candidate. This is what we believe. This is what's important for the country. Trump, he's not important for the country. Kamala's important for the country, right? You don't attack. If you attack Trump, you help him. That's what's not understood. If you attack him, you help him.
Well, I would say, the idea was let's move forward from Trump, but it's hard to do that when the candidate is talking about Trump a lot of the time. And, when the message of the Democrats is let's move forward from Trump by constantly talking about Trump. And I think that in a weird way, it helped to sell Trump to more voters. We also saw in the 2022 elections, Democratic operatives ran ads in many swing states or swing districts where they elevated the pro-Trump candidates in order to get those pro-Trump candidates into the primary with Democrats, so then the Democrats could easily beat the pro-Trump candidates. And I really wonder about the effect of of Democrats running pro-Trump advertising, millions and millions of dollars of pro-Trump advertising, and the effect that has over time on voters who may not have shown up in the midterms, but maybe did show up and vote for Trump finally. I mean, it's a short-term strategy with long-term consequences. Exactly. And so we find many ways that Democrats boost Trump. And I think hopefully after this election, we'll find a new way to address these issues without constantly assuming that boosting everything Trump says, amplifying everything Trump says in order to attack him will somehow miraculously defeat him, because we haven't seen that yet. As you say, we've only seen it help him.
Right. Just don't think of an elephant. Look, the main thing is Trump knows that the more outrageous things he says, the more he'll be attacked for them, and therefore the more he will be the center of attention. To make him the center of attention is to help him. That's what's not understood. Even if it's to attack him, the attack helps. It's ignoring him that is important.
Or at least minimizing him, right? He's
Minimize.
there, he's doing his thing,
He's doing his thing, and you just,
but here's what
oh,
we need for the future, and
oh,
here's what I'll do.
the answer is that's just Trump. Let's go talk about something real.
I think it'll get harder to do now that he's going to do this authoritarian stuff, right? The focus will be on all the bad stuff he's doing and the resistance to that. But I think we're talking here about the campaign. Right. We're not advocating to not pay attention to what Trump is doing, but we're saying there was a chance here to define a different path, a different future, and a lot of that time was spent attacking and boosting Trump. Let's get to our next point here. Trump remains a super salesman. A lot of Democrats underestimated Trump again, just as they did back in 2016. And that turns out to be a very dangerous thing to do, because no matter how deranged or nonsensical he seems to Democrats, he's connecting powerfully with millions and millions of American brains. And a lot of Democrats thought his performance in 2024 was laughable, but it turns out that the joke is on us. He's still a master at manipulating language and symbols, and now he's almost become bigger than politics, no matter what he does. I think Donald Trump could stand on a stage and crap down his leg, and it wouldn't harm him with his base supporters. They're in on the joke. As he once said, he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not lose any support. Sadly, it turns out that he wasn't very far off the mark there. So you called Trump back in 2016 a super salesman. Explain what that means and what it means to deal with someone like Trump in politics.
Think about what a super salesman is. A super salesman can easily pick out everybody's weaknesses and they address and they figure out what aspects of their products will overcome the weaknesses in the person they're talking to, So they see that somebody needs something or other. My product has that. They see that somebody doesn't like something or other in what they usually are normally getting. They'll say, my product is better than that. Right? That's what a super salesman does. He sees the weakness in the people he's addressing. And then he says what overcomes that weakness. And he comes up with something to overcome that and deal with that. And the problem is that Democrats don't understand that they have weaknesses, that everybody has weaknesses. Everybody has parts that they can attack. And, that democracy is the strength, not individuals, that it's the nation and the idea of the Constitution and so on, that's a strength, not just individual differences. And when you get your individual differences dealt with, not the country's, that's a problem. And it's important for voters to understand that the Constitution is more important than their own individual gripes. And that voters don't generally understand that. They don't, my mother taught me this when I was 7 years old. Oddly enough, that you vote, you always vote, and you vote for the country. That's not for you. You vote for the country. You vote for what's right, as opposed to individual.
Well, it seems like you're getting to our next 2 points here, which are A, people vote their values, not their self-interest, and B, identity is not political destiny. And there's been a lot of talk in the last few weeks about the perceived Democratic reliance on identity politics to deliver results that did not arrive in 2024. We saw Black men, Latinos, women voting in high enough numbers for Donald Trump, even though all of their self-interest is allegedly under threat, or obviously under threat from Donald Trump. And that didn't really seem to matter. And Marshall Gans, the organizing mastermind, said this today in the San Francisco Chronicle. He said that progressives in particular have been overly focused on, quote, people's labels. on their racial, ethnic, and gender demography. And Gann said that this is, quote, dehumanizing, regardless of what the particular is. And so you don't get people actually engaging with working people. We're looking at people's profiles and identities as opposed to what's going on in their lives, end quote. And we're seeing a lot of this, and it's kind of forming into this fight between, well, you white guys are saying that Democrats shouldn't care about people of color and women and LGBTQ people, etc. But I don't think that's what's really being said, although some people are not being diplomatic about how they're saying it. But I think the key is, and you've said this before, in 2016 you said Democrats need to abandon identity politics and find a more unifying way to approach these issues.
Exactly.
So I think what is being said is that's not connecting in the way we assume it connects. It's not motivating people to focus on identity differences as a political organizing tool in order to win elections. It's not working. And it's also assuming that people are voting their self-interest based on gender or ethnicity or race or sex versus some other deeper value there. So how do you parse this delicate discussion over the Democratic Party, identity politics, and the way forward?
I think the real thing that needs to be changed, and it's not easy, is to say all people are people. All people have a lot of the same needs. They need their families. They need to have a certain amount of wealth to get by in the world. They need to have jobs that are appropriate, to their skills and get paid for what they do. There are the idea of treating people by their identities as opposed to treating them as people is wrong. That is, no matter what your identity is, you're a person and you're like other people, and it's because you're a person, you're a human being, that you should be treated as a human being, not, being treated as Black or Latino or whatever. You should be treated as a human being. If you treat people as people, that's what democracy is about. Democracy isn't about, you being better than someone else. My father explained this to me when I was 7 years old. I asked him about what democracy meant. I heard the word over and over, and I was on the radio, and I asked my father, what does that mean? And he says, democracy means that there's nobody better than you, and you're not better than anybody else. A 7-year-old could understand that, which I did. And it's important. That's right. That's what democracy is about. Period. Right there.
I think it's important to say that obviously issues of race and gender and discrimination are important. But when talking to voters in an election, we have to understand that is not necessarily the primary lens through which voters are viewing their needs and their futures.
Right.
It's more close to Maslow's hierarchy of needs than to some academic progressive view that your first lens is your racial or gender identity. And of course, there may be external forces and perhaps people should see things that way. Perhaps, racism and sexism and bigotry have a huge outsized role in society. But that's really not how a lot of people who are from different backgrounds, racial, ethnic, gender, etc., are seeing things. When I think of in my own family, a lot more Latinos went for Trump in 2024 than in 2016. And people don't understand, how could Latinos vote for Trump? He's so racist against immigrants. Well, that's assuming that all Latinos are somehow immigrants or are related to immigrants. There are a lot of second, third, fourth generation Latinos here who may not know any undocumented immigrants at all, and who may think of themselves as Americans who don't want undocumented immigrants coming over the border. And in my own family, I have a Trump supporter. Actually, I have a few, but one of my Trump supporting relatives grew up mostly on welfare and had an undocumented parent from Mexico. And how could that person support Trump, who wants to collapse the social welfare system and who despises undocumented immigrants and plans to persecute them and target them? Well, the psyche of the voter And the Latino voter is a lot more complicated than some people might assume. I
Right.
assume in the case of my relative that, well, they're married to someone who's a Trump supporter, and their Trump support seems to have coincided with that relationship. But there was something already there that had their brain primed for that. So
Well,
we can't.
there is machismo,
Mhm. That's
right?
one that comes up a lot. But there's also, I think, a lot of working people especially, they just want to feel like there's hope for their future and that they're going to make more money next year than this year. And it's easy for a strong man, strict father message to give that assurance.
Mhm.
I don't think it's all machismo. You have to think about Mexico just elected its first woman president. Before the United States did,
Right.
right? So where's the machismo in that?
Right.
Right? So it's a little more complex than just one lens or another. But there is a susceptibility, and there's this weird idea that somehow the Republicans are speaking directly to the issues of working people and Democrats are not, which is insane when you think that Trump is a billionaire who was boosted by Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, and their big plan is to lower taxes on the wealthy and to cause temporary hardship for everybody else, according to Elon Musk. So there's something missing in all of this, but somehow Trump has been able to crack the code through his simple, direct language, which seems insane to a lot of us, but is connecting with people mostly because of its spirit, its attitude, and the moral authority he conveys, not as someone who is good according to democratic morals,
Mm.
but as someone who is strong and overpowering and dominant, and which is considered the best way forward in a lot of brains. So the other lesson we draw from this is that identity is not political destiny. It matters. It matters who you are. It matters how you're treated, whether you face discrimination or not. But we have to understand that Trump's strict father appeal is crossing racial, ethnic, and gender lines, and
Right.
that hoping that people will oppose Trump because of his racism or his misogyny or his anti-LGBTQ beliefs is a mistake, and we shouldn't make that mistake again. We have to find a more direct and powerful way to unite people around what we have in common instead of counting on people uniting around their collection of differences and the way that that supposedly clashes with what Trump and the Republicans want for the future.
Right. And so our job now is to say what it is that unites people on the basis of what they have in common. We have a job to do to get that out there. What is it that unites people that is not superficial things like the color of their skin or their racial background or other forms of identity, but makes them human beings in general, that sees their humanness as central, not their membership in some group.
And let's leave it on this point. And this is one you've been raising the alarm on for decades now. It's one of the reasons why we know each other and have worked together. The authoritarians are winning the communication war.
Right.
Not only have they spent decades building a right-wing media ecosystem to undermine the traditional press and get their message out, but they've also done more advanced work on how to reach people, how to convert brains toward authoritarianism. And it doesn't matter that their information weapon is largely dependent on conspiracy theories and falsehoods. This has become an undeniably powerful force. And we saw this in this election. All of these podcasts that many people had never heard of or listened to suddenly matter a lot. They have huge audiences, some of them bigger than the usual cable TV channels. There's been a fragmentation in media, and the right wing has capitalized on this and is finding ways to win the communication war and reach a lot of people, especially young people, with their messages. And meanwhile, the Democrats have no comparable effort, and instead have relied on mainstream media to be a neutral arbiter of reality, as it has traditionally been back in the days when people watched 3 news stations and they all had some same version of the shared truths. Shared truths no longer really exist
In the Walter
anymore.
Cronkite era.
Yeah, back in the Cronkite era. But instead of remaining objective, what these news outlets have largely done by trying to be fair is they've normalized Trump. And this has aided and assisted his shift into a would-be dictator.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, a lot of these prominent legacy media properties are being snatched up by billionaires who may not have democracy's best interests in mind over the long term. We saw this with the Washington Post and the LA Times, both billionaire-owned, refusing at the last minute to endorse Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And this was unusual because the editorial staffs were pretty sure they were going to endorse, and suddenly the billionaire owner vetoes the idea. So when you have your news outlets owned by billionaires who may have something to gain from an authoritarian system or fear being targeted by an authoritarian leader, doesn't work in the favor of the people. So Democrats have been losing the messaging war for decades, and they're also losing the media war now. And there's been a big failure to invest. What do you see happening here? Are Democrats and progressives going to be able to rise to the task and take communication seriously? Or are we just going to keep sliding down this slope into a authoritarian-dominated podcast and media future?
Democrats have a terrible, terrible set of assumptions about rationality. They assume that rationality is just what they have, a rationality that they think rationally, and that rationality wins. And it doesn't. They're not thinking about emotionality. They're not thinking about how people are run by their powerful emotions, how emotionality can there's a great book on this by Antonio Damasio called Descartes' Error, where Descartes said, thought is rational. This is all about rationality. And what Damasio pointed out was it ignores emotions. It ignores the power of emotions in your everyday life and where emotions show up in your everyday life, which is almost everywhere. Right? So it's very important to understand that, Democrats should not just talk about rationality. They have to ask what emotions are involved in supporting democratic causes. Have you ever heard Democrats talk about the emotions involved in supporting democratic causes? I've never heard it. Never heard Nancy Pelosi come out and say, here are the emotions that are, I've never heard Democratic leaders come out and say, look, that democracy is emotional. The reason that the Constitution is important is emotional. It's not just rational. It's rational, yeah, but it's also something is deep-seated in what it means to you physically, in your body. Why do you want to live bodily live in a country that is a democracy rather than an autocracy? That's embodiment. It's there. It's physical. And Democrats don't understand that. They don't understand the emotion and physical part of democracy. And the idea of talking about emotions is important. You live, your everyday life is an emotional life. Very often you don't realize how much of a role your emotions are playing in everyday decisions. They're all over the place as soon as you start thinking about it. Then there are positive emotions. So people think emotionality is negative. No. A lot of, your emotions are positive emotions. Love, care, responsibility. These are positive emotional attitudes. And the idea of positive emotions is crucial. Understand your positive emotional life. This is not just about, Cartesian rationality. There are reasons why we have emotions. We have emotions because they're healthy. Your emotional life, can be terrible with terrible emotions, or you can have wonderfully healthy emotions. But the idea that of Damasio's book, Descartes' Error, is exactly right. There are positive emotions. Feelings of emotion, feelings of love and responsibility and care are emotional things. And it's those positive emotions that are crucial in everyday life. that you have to evaluate, talk in terms of them, understand them, and so on. And a lot of Democrats don't understand that. They don't understand the role of emotionality in being a Democrat.